Hey everyone! Before we begin today's episode, I would like to remind you guys again to please check out some of my other YouTube channels in the description down below. I have a Star Wars Battlefront 2 classic focused channel where I review custom maps and mods on the Battlefront Max channel. I do gaming reviews on the Kanoa Reviews channel, and I've also recently started a Minecraft adventure channel where I play through classic adventures with friends. You can find the links in the description, and please subscribe to those channels if you like what you see. Thanks, and enjoy the rest of the episode. The Imperium of Man has faced many enemies during its war campaigns. The Orcs, the Eldar, Chaos. But another fierce adversary of theirs is the Tyranid swarm, guilty of destroying and eradicating countless planets and systems already. They haunt worlds like the plague, often resulting in Inquisitors calling for an exterminatus once a Tyranid swarm has been confirmed on a certain planet. One particular world that had been battle-scarred already, with blood soaked in its sands, and wrecks of combat that once was decorating the fields. Rumors of Chaos' presence had been noted. Chaos, the great enemy, needed to be stopped at all costs. In a barren desert, a large, ominous ritual site had been discovered, but no immediate Chaos units were spotted in the near vicinity. The closest Imperial Guard was ordered to establish a perimeter and dig in case they came into enemy contact. They had to wait just a few hundred meters away from the ritual site until someone would arrive who was more qualified to judge the findings and make a decision on what to do next. But it was a trap. Whether the Chaos found what they were looking for and left, or decided to leave prematurely, the fact was that this planet had already have an established invader, the Tyranids. On the third day of the Imperial Guard's watch, suddenly thousands of Tyranids crept out of the sand. They were the smaller types of Tyranids, which was why their presence went unnoticed, but nevertheless, they were just as lethal. The alarm was immediately raised, and all personnel headed towards their battle stations. There was silence over the entire trench line. The only sounds that could be heard were the shouts from the commissars, entrusting everyone to stand their ground for their emperor. But many of the Imperial Guard were trembling. Almost no one had faced the Tyranids before, but all knew one thing. When one were to face off against an orc and perish, chances were high that it would be quick, and one would be dead right before much pain field in front of them lit up. Blinding flashlights were followed by scorching heat. The explosion created a wall of sand, dust, and fire. And though many a soldier was blinded by the strike, it did hit its mark and vanquished hundreds of Tyranids. By now, some of the Tyranids had reached out further into the sandy hills behind the trenches. Many of the soldiers here were still unscathed, but that was all about to change. Part of this was to blame for many soldiers running out of the trenches. Despite a few of the commissars still present, enough had been killed to where none were shot for moving backwards. By battling in the open, many soldiers could be easily surrounded, making it difficult to pick a target before it was already too late. Limbs were cut, intestines were torn out, and heads were decapitated. The desert had become a gruesome display of what the Tyranids were capable of. The battle had already been lost, but through the chaos, some had not realized this yet. They were just focusing on killing as many critters as they could, some not even realizing that they were the only one left in their squad. Groups of soldiers could be seen running away into the open desert, where surely the heat or thirst would get to them eventually, if not a vengeful bullet of a commissar if they ever ran into a friendly outpost. But even in the trenches, people were still fighting, some trapped by a wall of fire behind them, leaving them at the mercy of the Tyranid swarm. The amount of gunfire that could be heard had decreased significantly, but the screams were still plentiful. The ones who had lost their head were the lucky ones, but most died a slow and agonizing death. Amongst the bloodshed, a single commissar was still standing and breathing. In his final hour of despair, he still continued slaughtering the enemies of the Emperor of Mankind, showcasing devotion even if there were none who could witness this. But there were simply too many Tyranids. Nevertheless, even with his own guts hanging out of his belly, the commissar continued to fire until one fatal blow got the better of him and sent him flying only to drop back down on the ground, a dead man. And thus, the battle was over. Not everyone had died yet, but no one was in fighting condition. Several of the Tyranids scoured the outskirts, looking for any more potential prey. The trenches were flooded with blood and littered with bodies and body parts, both from the Imperial Guard and the Tyranids. The yellow desert had become something else entirely, now crimson with the blood of many, and green and gray with the bodies of the thousands that had covered entire sections in death and decay. It was clear that the situation was out of hand, but to some people's surprise, an exterminatus was not issued. Or maybe it was delayed for some reason. The Imperial ground troops, the lowest ranking of the infantry, could have no way of knowing, and thus, it kept to rumors whispered through the bunkers and the trenches. What was clear, though, was that this was out of the Imperial Guards' league, and thus the help of Space Marines was required. In this case, the noble Ultramarines would descend down on the planet to fight the Tyranid swarm. But the desert area where the Tyranids were first encountered had been entirely overrun, meaning that the point of descent would be somewhere else. A few hundred kilometers away, where the climate was quite different, would be used as a drop-off point for the Marines. But here too, Tyranid swarms started to come out of the woodwork. The swarm that was located here was not as massive as the one in the desert, but did have some more dangerous creatures amongst their ranks. Were these to face another group of Imperial Guard, the Imperial Guard would not stand a chance. But that was exactly what was about to happen once more. The nearest group of Imperial Guard were commanded to set up a makeshift defensive perimeter to defend the drop zone of the Space Marines. Though they had less men available, they did have some Lehman Russ tanks that they could use as devastating turrets. Again, the swarm they were about to face was smaller in terms of numbers, so hopefully the tanks gave them an edge to overcome this. It would take several minutes for the Space Marines to arrive. The officers and commissars shouted to everyone to keep calm and keep the faith. In a few moments, they would be relieved and reinforced by the glorious Ultramarines. But a few mere moments were more than enough for a Tyranid swarm to deal out grave damage to whoever stood before them.